Okay, so this is a video log for what is essentially just me talking about music to a camera, so I don't have to send paragraphs of messages to my friends who don't really care about Blade's new album, Cold Visions, which I'm going to be talking about today, or like having to do notes and things. I figured it'd be a good way to create a sort of output so I can remember how I felt about these kind of films, these like pieces of music that meant a lot to me. So I thought it'd become nice. And yeah, today I'm speaking about Cold Visions by Bladee, which I think is a very interesting album. I think what Bladee represents in modern kind of music culture is very interesting, because he has the kind of like, this album is all about duality, I think, in a lot of ways, and he is a very kind of doubleistic sort of thing, where he on one hand represents like flex kind of culture and this hype beast kind of clout kind of part of pop culture. He also, like on this album in specific, has a very deeply embodied kind of reference point with a lot of kind of very interesting kind of philosophies that you wouldn't expect maybe from an artist like this, or people would probably dismiss him for not having at first glance, seeing the kind of music he makes, and particularly the inaccessibility towards it. You wouldn't expect the kind of profound clarity that he achieves in this. Like, he's got some very interesting kind of embodied reference point in here about sort of like Buddhist karmic rebirth, and esoteric Christianity, and sort of he has references to like Nordic mythology and stuff on here, which I think is really interesting. And so I thought this would be a pretty good thing to kind of like explore and go through kind of like the work. So I wanted to start with like the name Cold Visions, and especially like that album cover. It creates a very clear kind of first immediate impression, right? It's almost very kind of like gothic, and the sound of this is very sort of gothic and dark and heavy and like, just horror sort of core type music, and it's very sort of interesting. Like, you've got these sounds of like electricity sparking, these dark cold voices, and like this evil laughing over the production, and that's another thing with him, is like that is as much tongue-in-cheek as it is like embodied into like the actual kind of ideas of the album. Like, he'll have a song about how he feels like he's died 1,000 times, and then it has like the sound of these Frankenstein kind of like electricity rays, where that's like coming back to life, that's rebirth, and that's pretty interesting. For me, like, that album title Cold Visions, it's something that's embodied and repeated like by this like kind of voice throughout the whole album, and I think it's pretty interesting because I think the idea of Cold Visions is central to the main conflict, which for me is the character of Bladee, or in this album, is someone who's very much distant from himself, very much self-destructive as he kind of prescribes it, and has a lot of kind of distancing or like self-harming behaviours, whether that's drugs, whether that's distancing himself from other people around him. And Cold Visions in this describes, I felt, some of the like euphoric kind of clarity he has about these kind of religious kind of visions, whether that's drug induced or his genuine own kind of belief systems, of how he knows he could break all of these cycles and how he knows he could get away, but he's so addicted to these self-harming kind of patterns, and he can't kind of whether it's symbolically or actually set himself kind of free from a lot of these kind of materialistic burdens. And then the way that takes context of clout culture, whereas like on one song he's going to be like flexing how much better he is than you, the audience, and then in the next one he's going to be like describing how distanced he feels from himself and how he feels that like being rich really isn't all that great, and that like being in LA off the coke and all of this stuff is actually pretty sad. And it just creates this very nice idea of this very fractured life. And I think that's it again, these kind of visions of himself as he could be, freed from a lot of this kind of stuff that he's vices that he's reliant on. It creates this very kind of pained sense of like clarity when he has these incredibly clear sort of visions of how he can help himself and how he has hope he can get better, and then on the next song he's like on a total downward spiral. And I think a specific line that I really felt illustrated that was on the later half of the album, or a specific kind of section, was this, or just a specific verse, I think. And that was, the easiest route is the one that I choose, because it feels like the only one working. This isn't the truth and I know, yet I choose the way that makes me lose, and that hurts me the most. So he's saying, he chooses the easiest route because it feels like the only one working, but he feels more distanced from himself because he knows that he could be on a path towards something better, towards breaking free from these like patterns of self-hurt that he's got. And I think that's a really interesting kind of concept for an album. So the first song I kind of want to talk about, some of them I'm going to speak on, some of them I'll skip over because I feel that it'd be me being tedious, or it's just nothing interesting I found in it. But other than that, I'll try and go in depth, sort of. And the first one I want to talk about is the actual kind of introduction. I know there's a sort of prelude, but Word Drainer, musically, I think works for this album and these ideas that I've spoke about very well, where it starts off with this high note, kind of electric beeping against this almost organ-like darker sound of the production, and it's a dissonance I felt that sort of worked very nicely for an opening track about the distance you feel from yourself with these kind of euphoric highs and these dark sort of lows, and that works with his mental health, the highs and lows of that, the crashing down of of his drug abuse. It really intertwines with that very nicely. And then the next track it leads pretty directly onto, again, that's the other thing, all of the songs on these, they kind of flow together, right? You can't really see a start or stop, and it creates this kind of this experience you feel like you can't get out of. It's very heavy, there's really no escape from it, they all flow together, and you get a sort of vision of Blade's perspective in this world where the days kind of sort of flow together, or like there's no escape, and just this, it never gives you time for a breath, there's always something going on, and there's always something, and it gives you like this very chaotic kind of vision of his own perspective, or the character of Blade, I guess, that he embodies on this perspective. And I think Young Sherman works pretty well in light of this. Like the specific line as well that touches on this contrasting kind of nature I want to talk on, was this little verse here where it's like, me and Young Sherman going rehab, this shit is very sad. Me and Young Sherman in Venice Beach, man, this shit is very rad. Me and Young Sherman at the gym working out and getting tanned. And like, that contrast is inherently really quite funny, and it's got like quite a lot of personality to it. But at the same time, it's got the framework of like he's going to rehab, and then also like the next day he's at Venice Beach doing whatever the fuck he wants. Like it's a pretty, you know, so he keeps you sort of entertained as he's also like describing what is an actually quite sort of fractured and like emotional sort of like contrast of what his life is. Yeah, and then the next part of this verse I wanted to speak on was, I will never see you again, and I hope you understand. I'm crashing down some like a wave over castles made of sand. And I thought that was very powerful. The first part I wanted to speak about with that was, I will never see you again, and I hope you understand. I'm just going to jump into this. Okay. Sure. I will never see you again, and I hope you understand. One thing throughout this album is he repeatedly has a figure, whether it's a girl or a love interest or the audience, I guess, that he's talking to. Because another thing about this is he's talking about his status and his position in fame a lot throughout this album. So it could be his relationship with an audience, it could be his relationship to a woman. Either way, it's his kind of proximity and his closeness to this figure. And on one, it again shows those kind of almost bipolar highs and lows, where on this song, it's his attitude towards her is, or towards her, I'll say, is, I will never see you again, and I hope you understand. And then on the next song, or on Flatline, like for example, is like, I would die for you, I would never lie to you, all of this other stuff. And it shows that kind of, again, really contrasting attitudes and the ups and downs of sort of how he feels. And then the next time, I'm crashing down some like a wave over castles made of sand. And I think that does almost support the idea that this could be about his relationship to his audience. Like the idea of crashing down, coming down from this high, like a wave over castles made of sand, and like a wave over castles made of sand. To me, that kind of has the idea of like, you know, this idea of washing away a kind of like legacy, almost like his position in culture, like this anxiety that where he is, his fractured state, his drug abuse, it could wash it all away. And, you know, to sort of add to this line, for one of the few times in the songs as well, he doesn't use kind of this electronic heavy scary sort of production at the end of this song. It ends on the sound of like a natural sound of a wave washing over, which contrasts against these blaring almost sort of dial-up internet kind of sounds. And yeah, I think it works sort of really nicely, like to, you know, outside, and this is what I mean about Blade's sort of inaccessibility. Like he has all of these sampled kind of sounds and reference points, but they're all ingrained within the context of this narrative or this emotion that he's trying to sort of talk about. Because to any other artist, having all of these blaring electronic sounds which make us feel distant to him, against these natural kind of against and then ending it with the sound of a wave crashing, it could just be seen as random or sort of sporadic, but this is showing this kind of like intimate, natural kind of side of him against also this electronic sort of noisy production. I think it works really nicely. And then that song goes on to Flatline again, which I spoke about a little bit, and this is another one which I think is sort of deeply ingrained, the ideas of reincarnation, especially like Flatline, like the idea of him dying and passing out. And again, it's I never want to see you cry, addressing this figure, this girl, and again there's these electricity sparks over this album, as well as this evil laughing, and it's like, yeah, the electricity sparking, as well as the idea of the song being called Flatline, It's got these the gothic kind of like sounds of like when Frankenstein came back to life and the thunder of that. And yeah, I think that works really sort of well with this idea of flatlining, but then immediately on the next track it goes into a phone dialing. So there's this idea of disconnect, and then on 1 second with Young Lean it's the idea of connection. So this idea of isolation, this idea of loneliness, then immediately contrasted with the first feature on the album with Young Lean, 1 second. And it's again like each song, even though they all feel like they blend together in some ways, they all stand by as a concept with himself. Like after this kind of loneliness where Blade's like, yeah, he's rapping about how he's kind of like flatlining, and this isolated sort of death, then it comes back based on connection, whereas on a phone call trying to find, like, talk with Young Lean and trying to find where he is, and then they like share a few verses between them, and it's like every single track on here with Young Lean is great in my opinion. Like just in terms of like a musical standpoint, I think they're great songs, and I think they like again like really push it on here. But they share verses on here going back and sort of forth, and going, you know, and they get louder and louder on this song, and the production gets louder and louder, and then right at the end it shatters. So again, it's this idea of like each new song on this album is a literal like rebirth, is like a literal life and then the death. It gets louder and louder and more filled with life as they're going back and forth, and then it all shatters. Everything that they held and all those values on that song, it starts over again. And I think that's really like, there's that literal shattering sound of glass at the end, and it's just, you know, on another artist will maybe just use that as like something without that context, but it's ingrained again in these ideas of karma and rebirth and a new start, and it becomes an exhaustive thing because each song does this, and it's like it becomes exhausting in a way which isn't necessarily wearing down. It feels like it's by design, where it's taking you into Blade's sort of experience of life every day, these kind of hopes or this new life or what he's trying to embody, and these mood swings. It almost feels like just shattering and starting over again, and it's like, oh my god, you just get so lost and you get so heavy in it, even though this album's only like an hour. Then the next song is just gonna check this. The next song is like again after what has been kind of like a more heavy sort of run of 2 songs, it goes back to Sad Meal, which I think I referenced sort of earlier, where again he can talk about these kind of like sort of deeper sort of ideological ideas and like complicated kind of ingrained reference points of describing his own experience and the difficulties and the ups and downs, and then he'll have a song called Sad Meal where he's saying like, I'm at McDonald's, get the sad meal, and saying how much better dressed he is. But even then, like, it's got this kind of layer to it where like he's balancing, you know, it's not, there's a very few rare moments on this album where when he does it really hits, where he goes completely deep into his emotions. Usually it's done in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way like this, where it's still consumable, I guess, or it's still, you can listen to it without it being like, whoa, this is way too heavy. And he does that because obviously being overbearing emotions would be way too much most of the time. And yeah, so he manages to balance it in this tongue-in-cheek way, and also like you say, the idea of Sad Meal, or like it's based around, you know, I'm not gonna over deep this, but it's based around fast food culture, you know, it's based around consumerism still. He's talking a lot about kind of like flexing in this album, all that stuff. It's ingrained like in the context of the album. He's not just making, you know, these like references for no reason. Then the next I wanted to talk about was Fun Fact, which is another Young Lean feature. And again, I think it's really good. Like, I just want to, just in terms of this gothic sort of nightmarish concept, like, Young Lean contributes to that so much in this album. Like, I'll read this verse where it's like, I'm with Blade like I'm Blade running with 100 racks. It's the return of the Batman and Bane in his mask. Still off the opiates, itching like I got a rash. All these boys, they've been stealing swag, put them in the trash. I don't care cause I love it, eat out of our hands. We done changed up the whole game, put it in a chokehold. And it's like, again, it's just this kind of nasty sort of vision of this guy eating out of his hands, and they're like Batman and Bane. He's got a rash off the opiates, and it's like it creates this really sort of nitty, degenerate like feel that really sort of works. And in terms of like describing a really unhealthy lifestyle in a flex way, like that's a really good way of doing it. And the idea of like Bane and, you know, taking off his mask, it, like, again, linking to kind of, it creates this villain, it adds to this villainous kind of concept so much. And again, based on this kind of like idea of them as heroes, Batman and Bane, he then goes on later to talk about, again, this is a bit about status that I think works really nicely, where he's like, I know you want to be us, but we are just some weirdos, two old heroes stuck up in this folklore, feel like we came up too fast. And that's kind of like a more kind of like that first verse I read to you was that first part I read to you was the first verse, this part is the second, and it shows after he's got all of this kind of like flexing about how he's changed the game up, it's also got this other side where it's like, damn, I feel like I came up too fast, but we're just some, you know, we're some weirdos, we're stuck in our folklore, like they're stuck in their own kind of sense of status, so they're stuck up in their own kind of idea of themselves, and it's hard to sort of break out of. And again, that links really well to kind of like the ideas that Blade's talking about, trying to break out of your own self. And again, just what a good sort of contribution to that theme, I feel like, or the overall concept. Then the next that like to be honest, I don't have there's like 22 songs on this, and I don't remember which ones I might be skipping out or not. So if I do say this is the next song and I've actually missed like an interlude or something like that, then that is my mistake. But again, I don't have this entire track list like mesmerized. But the next song I'm talking about is Only God Is Made Perfect. This just a few lines where I thought it was interesting. Whereas like, I'm fried doing rituals, I don't even want to be next to you. It kind of links to like a few lines on this song where he describes that like he's closed off, and the idea of like doing rituals, it almost creates this alchemical sort of image of him, like and again, there's another line, I don't even want to be next to you, which I thought was interesting as well, in terms of like his back and forth with this audience, with this relationship where a second ago he was saying he would die for her, now I don't even want to be next to you. And the main reason I had I'm fried doing rituals is because I think it leads very well into his next, the image he creates of himself on the next song, which is, it's not my favourite song on the album, but it's like, it's one of my favourites. I really, really like it. I think it works really well, and it's Don't Want to Hang Out. So he underscores this kind of downward spiral on this song, and it really is like, this is the lowest up until this point in the album we've seen Blade at. Bladee, I don't know how to say it. And it starts with this spiraling kind of production where it's like up, down, like if you listen to it, you can get that kind of sense, like especially with the higher kind of like lower production, and I think that again is very intentional. because this is a deeply kind of like, it really goes into how closed off and how self-destructive and distancing he is. Like, trash bags on the window, I don't want to hang out. Doors locked on the safe, I don't want to hang out. And there's that repeated motif throughout, I don't want to hang out, I don't want to hang out, as the line he goes back to. And it's really self kind of like retreating and going into yourself, but he turns it like, there's a lot of really emotionally hitting kind of moments on this. Like, he's like, low-key, after all of this materialism and after all of this kind of flexing on this album, he says, low-key, you're better off being broke. Having success is not that dope. Being in LA off that coat, surrounded by people I don't even know, surrounded by people I don't even like, fake ass love, that shit played out. Don't care about your status, that shit played out. I don't care if you're rich, I don't want to hang out. And he goes deeper, and the sound of his voice on this, it sounds so desperate and so like fragile and sad. And it's like, at some point you can't even hear what he's saying, but it's like, because his voice is cracking and breaking, and it's like he's making this effort to keep the composure of this like idea of himself that he said. And in a weird way, some of the most heartbreaking sort of lines on this are where again his voice is cracking, and he's like, if you're not SG, I don't want to hang out. If you're not Drain Gang, I don't want to hang out. As he's saying this with his voice cracking. So it's like he's still trying to keep this idea of himself, despite being at such a fragile low in this album, where he's finally admitting that it's like, all this fake love is nothing, and I'm in LA with people I don't know, doing coke. This is like morbid. And he's still doing this, if you're not Drain Gang, I don't want to hang out. He's still turning that I don't want to hang out with you into a flex. Like, he's still using it as a weapon, even in this moment where he's so fragile. Like, and I think that's a very powerful kind of moment in this album. And it's almost like, again, it's exhausting, where it's like, oh my god, you're clearly so unwell, but you're still trying to turn it into a flex and like an inclusivity thing, where it's like, if you're not Drain Gang, I don't want to hang, like, and I think it works really well. And then it goes into, like, this and I Don't Like People work very well as two songs in close proximity to each other. And it's like, it speaks to him very well as an artist. Like, the line on I Don't Like People, which I think is another great song, another great Young Lean feature. If you see me out, don't talk or don't approach me. He's saying that, and again, here it's more directly, like, to his fans, this communication. But what he does very well is with I Don't Want to Hang Out or I Don't Like People is he distances himself from his own audience, I think, his own fan base, like, pretty well, in a really interesting way. And he's just like a master of creating something that's like totally inaccessible, and he's actively pushing you away. It's like, if you see me out, don't talk or don't approach me. He's almost acting like he's better than his fans. It's like, unless you know what I mean? And this crazy sort of production on here with these loud electric sounds, which are very kind of acquired, and these interpolations of like people speaking over it without seemingly any rhyme or reason, and those isolating kind of lyrics, like, it's a random or like religious kind of experience. It is isolating, like, this is, but he wears it, the idea that he turns it into something to flex, like these points of references and like everything that he's about, he turns it into a flex where it's like, you're not as good as I am, I don't even want to see you if you see me around. Like, it works because by acting like he doesn't give a shit about his audience at all, it doubles down the amount of investment that they want into his music. By pushing them away, it almost brings them to him more. And I've seen other artists, like one of my favourite comedians, Stuart Lee, which is a weird reference point to bring up now, but he does this where he constructs a character for his comedian which is so unbearable, and he's so like pretentious and like above you, and he plays into like, oh, you guys won't get my work so much as he's delivering it, that everyone sort of wants to, and everyone wants to be in on the kind of in on the joke, or in on the idea, or in on what it's about. And it's like, by creating something so inaccessible, he's creating his own world. And if you're in, then it's like, if you're not Drain Gang, I don't want to hang out. If you're not in, then you're not part of it. You're not one of us. And he does it very well. Like, look at the cover. It's this demonic kind of scary, and like, it's not a conventionally kind of appealing sort of cover to try, or commercial cover. Yeah, but he's still carved this place in pop culture for himself by doing that. And I think it's genuinely really sort of genius. The next song I sort of wanted to talk about was End of the Road Boys, and again, it's just a verse I picked up on which I thought would be something nice to touch on. Mental health awareness, man, I'm anxious and I'm paranoid. You know this shit go round and round and round like a Ferris wheel, and you know what goes around comes around like a carousel. I don't think I need to explain that anymore, but just in terms of what's already been spoken about on the album, the idea of things coming around and the days blending together, and this constant like wave of what he's going through. It's pretty heavy. Because the next song I want to talk about is another like favourite. Like, I got 3 in mind, particularly in terms of the concept and the sort of emotion of this, that are my favourites on here. The next one being Don't Do Drugs, and the last one and the third one being the last song on this album. I think it's just worth reading out the lyrics because it kind of speaks for itself, I feel like. In terms of another pure emotional point where he lets sort of his guard down, and just some of the sheer sort of like hope on here. So in terms of that, feel like every ship has sailed, feel like everything is too late, feel like nothing is okay, feel like there isn't any way. Feel hate as soon as you awake, each day is ruined every day, might as well do it anyway, might as well go through it anyway, because you can't see another way, but there must be another way. But you're too caught up in the shame, but there must be another way. So again, it's got like, feel like everything's too late, feel like nothing's okay, but he's battling with himself between these two sides of himself. And it gets to a point where it's like, that we've been working to almost on the whole album, where it feels like it could be an endpoint, where it's like, which side of this is going to win? This pessimist, is it like self-hatred, or there must be another way? And then the song goes on, he goes on to say, but you're too caught up in the shame, but there must be another way, but you must have a higher aim. You should forgive yourself again, and walk the way that you create, and walk away from all this pain. Don't be addicted to the pain. There is a way that you can take. There is a way that you can take, but it's a way you'll have to paint. The way is one you'll have to make, because only you can break the chains. And even if it feels so hopeless, it's never too late or over. There's always a way from nowhere. Only up, we can't go lower. Only up now, we can't go lower. Love, let's go. And I think that's just especially like a staggeringly sort of hopeful moment on this album, where it's like, that feels like it could be the last kind of note of this song, where it's like, don't be addicted to the pain, there's a way that you can take. And just in terms of what we know he's going through in his headspace, it means it's incredibly kind of satisfying and almost emotional that he can find this hope and this framework of how to carry on, even despite all of that, and that persistence of that value is like, it's incredible kind of clarity. But then as soon as this song's over with only up now, we can't go lower, it goes straight directly into another song of pessimism and flexing again. And it's like, it's this exhaustive thing where Bladee manages to reach this moment of like emotion and clarity about his perspective and his situation and how he can find hope. Then on Lows Partly, it goes straight back into that kind of morbidness again. And I think the way that he goes about going into more of a morbid kind of tone and a contrasting tone straight after that is very funny, because the opening line of the next song is a Morrissey quote or a Morrissey reference directly after. And what better way of showing that, that you're at like peak kind of like pessimism, nothing matters, than quoting Morrissey, who's like the king of, just like self-embracive sort of lowness, to the point where it's almost like a parody. And he starts the next song with "Hang the fucking DJ, burn the disco," and he also says later on in the song, "It says nothing to me about my life." And again, I do find it kind of funny because like later on, he also interpolates Charlie XCX with like. He says specifically like "Let's Ride" on one of the songs, and I'm like, I think Bladee is maybe one of the only modern artists who can like, you know, interpolate Charlie XCX and Morrissey as two very sort of contrasting artists in the same breath, and I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, for this song anyway, like again, it goes straight into this pessimism, and it's like. There's lines where it's like, "Free me from this fever dream. I spent so many nights trying to get right. I try, trying to make it out, stuck in my fucking mind." And then he has a line where he says, I killed myself so many times. And again, it's like, to be able to create this genuine low against, and again, the song is called Lows partly, which is again in reference to some of the partial lows and highs that he has. Directly after this moment of hope, it's this frustrating experience, but it builds the world of his life so well in a way that I don't think many artists could, because usually a lot of artists, like if you think about, I don't know, they can only build up their entire, like a Kendrick Lamar comes to mind, where it's like you almost build an entire album around these euphoric kind of moments of hope or whatever it is. Like think Sing About Me, I'm Dying with First. Think like Mother I Sober, think, you know. But he reaches that point, kind of, not to compare to very different artists in quality, but he has the ability to go there, bring it back, go there again, and like it all works to an effect where it doesn't feel like, oh my god, what new are we getting at here? Because it's all part of the experience, all part of the felt emotion. The next song on here I'm gonna go into is Terrible Excellence. And this, in terms of the gothic horror ideas of this album and that concept and tone, this is like at its best with this, like the sound of this, and then this horror kind of soundscape, and then him and Young Lean again really kind of killing the concept of it, where it starts off with the lines, "I want to kill everything and be nothing." And again, the tongue-in-cheek, like there's an interpolate or like a voice going profound sadness, and like an echoing voice over this, which is so easy to almost make fun of, that it's like you don't. Again, it's isolating you while bringing you in. It's interesting. Yeah, I want to kill everything and be nothing. I want to kill everything just like Chucky. I'm dream weaving. I smile, but I'm still grieving. I like eating the night. I am mistreating. The cycle is repeating. And then Lean comes in again, and what he does very well is he adapts kind of like, not only does he able to like add to the concept of the album really well, but he can do it while kind of while like taking it in a place from him as an artist independently. So or like contributing to where he's coming from as an artist. He's not just lending himself to Blade's vision. It's like it's still putting his mark on the song. And he does this, so you know, he fits the content by being like, Blade said we do this shit like we've been here before. Again, the ideas of like cycles. I'm close to God. Then he says, I'm close to God, I close my eyes and we go one for one. And contrasts to that with a line a little bit later where it's like, I don't want to write another sad song, but there's so much to come. And these two lines I felt specifically kind of contrasting each other, because I'm close to God, I close my eyes and we go for one. That's, again, like Blade's proximity to this kind of euphoric, cold vision of what he could be, and of excellence, and like this proximity to a pure anti-materialistic life, or being in a state of like bliss and this closeness against, I don't want to write another sad song, but there's so much to come. And that line specifically makes me think of Young Lean as a figure. Like, if you know about him, about kind of like Sad Boys, you know, like, I think a lot of his more popular stuff is based around kind of like his sad kind of slower songs, even though he's got a lot of varying kind of tracks. I think that's kind of part of what got him his kind of like, or got him seen into a mainstream level on some songs. Is it Kyoto, I think, is one of those. But yeah, and I think again, he just is able to shape the narrative from a personal way really well. The song Red Cross, again, another reference point, which is like just really interesting, where he talks about praying to a red cross, which is referencing Fra Angelico's Transfiguration painting, which is like you're referencing, like, I don't think it is Renaissance era paintings, but you're referencing that kind of classical painting, and it's a painting of depicting Christ's resurrection, and Fra Angelico, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that, Fra Angelico, like he famously kind of depicted it as a giant red cross, coining that as the symbol of resurrection, and he's using that here again on the song Red Cross to, you know, add this extra kind of like layer, which I think is really interesting. Ugh. Then the song King Nothing. I said I have 3 favourites, but this one is maybe one of my favourites in terms of just a song, in terms of instrumental, and it goes maybe the furthest. Again, it's just this constant going further idea, like, and you're constantly waiting, like, for when it's going to break, like what side is he going to land on, this monstrous kind of like side of the gothic kind of side of the concept, where each time it's pushed and he goes further into this production or further into this character, it's like, when is it going to end? And this song especially, I think, is my favourite moment in terms of the music and the instrumental, besides maybe the last song. If not one of my favourite songs out of those 3 I mentioned earlier, it might be my favourite instrumental moment. And it's just so overbearing, and it just descends more and more to the point where Bladee in the song is hardly audible, but it works so well. It's so layered and it's so like nightmarish. And his voice switch ups and his flows switch up so many times in this song, and it really works. And he's almost like screaming at some points, and at other points his voice is really weak, and you almost can't hear him, like his voice is faltering, and it really works. There's like cars driving by, and it just creates this soundscape that's really, really chaotic. And the whispers that are playing over the track, they become even more intrusive, like intrusive kind of thoughts is what it makes me think of, because it's like, if you're listening on headphones, you get them in one ear, and it's like, it's really kind of scary, and it really kind of works. But then after this, like, you know, overbearing, scary kind of production, it goes straight into the song Bad for Business, which is this beautiful moment of angelic kind of clarity, where he's singing like, I shoot till it's empty, I don't know, have I made it impossible, I don't know, if I don't make it back, just know I would never let you go. And he's talking about if he can't break away from these cycles, if he can't get out of his own head, has he made it impossible for himself to actually be able to go back? Because after that moment of clarity, here he is back again, questioning if it's actually impossible for him to get back to a normal mental state. And after that desperate expression on that last track of something, that monstrous kind of like, the overbearingness almost makes you feel like it's trying to fill something. And here is much more directly asking, like, just know I would never let you go. And his voice is so high pitched in this, and then it lowers again. It lowers to this more deflated verse, where he speaks about hopelessness, forming like a dark cloud over my tiny world. Every tiny little worry is so large in this small little world, where nothing seems to work and death is in the sunset. And it's like, again, that's not as, again, it still works in terms of contrast to that last more mantra, because even though that's pessimistic in a way, it's him really, he's not being overbearing and overly kind of, he's not almost compensating in the production with the material soundscape. It's all minimalism, and he's being direct, and it's like he's talking directly. It's like, look, this is hopelessness. Every small thing that affects me is like mass scale. It hurts me so much. And it's like, man, another moment he manages to create that's deeply kind of upsetting. I'm going to skip a few songs especially here because I don't feel I've got that much to contribute, because it's again that cyclical thing of where he's playing with when's the song going to stop and going to these euphoric kind of highs and lows. But I'm going to go straight to Other Side, which is a few songs skipped down, and it is just this almost edging process where Other Side becomes this very high scale grandiose production, and you really get the impression of the stakes being built as we get to the end of this album. It's like, where after all of this is he going to land? Is he going to be able to sort himself out? Is he going to be able to ultimately find hope? Since each song changes, where is it sort of going to land? Where is this ultimately going to... is he going to get a profound sort of, moment of clarity? And I think in this song it's best illustrated with, fuck what it is, does it hit? I got so rich off the spit. I'll post a pic, now you're pissed. I'll put your friends on the list. I'll pay your rent for the year. Take care of you when you're sick. I'll throw myself in a ditch. I'll hurt myself if you wish. And what works about this is, again, that verse specifically, this is one of my favourite flows that he kind of goes into on this album, where it's got these short kind of almost rapid fire lines where it starts off almost as like flexing, fuck what it is, does it hit? I got so rich, and it's flex braggadocious, but it breaks down, and as he's going on across these short fire lines, I post a pic, it still flex, now you're pissed. I put your friends on the list, it slowly turns into doing things favourably for someone else. I'll pay your rent for the year, take care of you when you're sick, I'll throw myself in a ditch, I'll hurt myself if you wish. And his flow and the sound of his voice, it becomes really like, it's breaking, it's high pitched and goes more high pitched as he goes deeper into it, and it ends on I'll hurt myself if you wish. So you're just like, and because of the humanity in his voice and where he is, and after this whole journey, you're just so invested in this point. It's like, well, this could end dangerously. I'll hurt myself if you wish, for his relationship with this person, in his effort to prove his feelings after this back and forth sort of bipolar attitude towards her. And it's just this demonic portrait of himself, desperate, and he has lines of himself where it's like, it's so severe, it's so gothic, this kind of construction of himself as a serial killer, desperate for someone, desperate for anything, for drugs, whatever's going to hit, desperate for money, and he's crawling in the sewer with an axe on the side, dark tinted windows on the whip, let's ride. That's the Charlie XCX kind of reference I was mentioning earlier, where it's like, that's a kind of, again, that high scale production in that song, in Let's Ride, where it's bringing it back into a more dark context, and it's like, the fact that you can do that so effortlessly is pretty impressive. Okay, so probably for a good thing, because my voice is like, my camera keeps going, so I'm like having to, it goes every 10 minutes, so I have to pause it, but like there've been a couple of times I've had to stop, so my voice is like breaking now. But I'm getting to the final kind of ends of the song, the last sort of 3 songs, and the first one is, I mean, again, skipping some of the other ones towards the end, I chose one which I felt really sort of important. And the first one I want to talk about is Faultless. Specifically, there's a line on this which I thought was interesting, and it's a repeated motif that I wouldn't feel right if I didn't mention at some point, where he uses the number 3 a lot in terms of like angel numbers, or like 3 being a very important number in Norse mythology. And he says, seen the 3 transform to a free. Again, this idea of free, that's the name of one of his own albums. And so the idea of this is, I thought, see the 3 transform to a 3. So in Norse mythology, Odin hung himself on the world tree for 9 days, and in Norse mythology it's 3, 6, 9 that are important numbers. So seeing the 3 transform into a 3, and he hung himself to gain all of this knowledge and wisdom. So it's about self-sacrifice or self-giving in to gain wisdom. So I figured that was what that line was probably in reference to. And again, what a crazy just sort of point of reference to throw in just like one throwaway bar. And again, the ideas of free being like life, death, rebirth. That's kind of in typical sort of like, you know, esoteric circles. That's sort of what that is meant to embody. And there's interesting parts about status on this for him as well. And coming to the end of this album, you get a sense of really how much he's losing himself. And he says on like specifically the lines, which I thought was interesting in relation to this, were "Bring some feathers and bring some tar, give your life to Lanai, to a god that is so false. Then I believe I used to be real, but now I don't. I don't. But now I don't. But now I don't. I don't know. Question me, don't question God." And again, it's interesting because bring some feathers and some tar, which is meant to be like a public form of humiliation, right? Which was at the start of this album as well. His anxiety is about publicly humiliating himself, ruin his career. Give your life to the night, to a god that is false, almost claiming that like the position he's got like is almost godlike, where he has another line where he's like, see the comments on my social media, don't know if you deserve me. And it's like that. It's like, does he really deserve this status that he's got? He's playing a false god. And it's like, you're again wondering, as he's calling for himself to be feathered and tarred, is this going to end in a destructive way, or is it a good thing that he has a line where he's saying, question me, don't question God, and he's calling for his identity and what he represents to be questioned, not God, which is a bigger kind of more, you know, universal thing. Like he's trying to dissociate himself from seeing himself God level and take away from this materialism. So is this staring towards a good thing, or is it, you know, a worrying thing where he's saying, I believe I used to be real, but now I don't know. It's really this is the like third to last song, I think, and you feel it reaching an end. So Can't Let End on a Loss. It's interesting, the final two songs on the album are both, he calls it like ending one and ending two, or something similar to that. Almost like he doesn't know himself where he's going to end up. I think that is the idea. He doesn't know himself on what note this album is going to end, which is why it's ending one, ending two. There's one of pessimism more, and one of, but we can get into that. So, the first ending in the song he has is Can't End on a Loss, where he says, one of the lines that sticks out to me in this is, thank you for everything, but you know what's going on with us. Thank you for hearing me out. And this is kind of a worse ending where he's thanking his audience, but you know what's going on with him. It's almost like, thank you for listening, but he feels like he's going to be washed under by his mental health. And this is the song with line, every time I check the comments I'm thinking, do they even deserve me? I'm like you, I'm living and I'm learning. At least we're going to keep the fire burning. And it's again, at least we're going to keep the fire burning. It feels sort of inevitable. And he has this frantic, desperate breathing on this track. And his voice goes more and more quiet as he goes on, which I think is interesting with at least we're going to keep the fire burning, as his voice is literally diminishing. It's like he's insisting that he's going to keep the fire burning, and he keeps on saying, I can't end on a loss, I can't end on a loss. So it's almost like he doesn't know if this is the end or not. This is the ending track. He's like, he's resisting. He's like, I've got to keep the fire burning. I can't end on a loss. I can't end on this pessimistic note. But he's also acknowledging that maybe this is the end. Thank you for everything, but you know what's going on. You don't know if he's going to give in and be washed over by his mental health. And it feels really sad and really felt. But fortunately enough, I guess it isn't actually the final song. And that is Cold Visions, the name of the album. And the music on this final track, this is my favourite song across the whole album. I think the music is so good, It's really, really beautiful, and it's such a stunning kind of hopeful song. So yeah, it starts off again. I've emphasised that there's like this electronic heavy gothic kind of sound across the whole album. Here it comes in with like this angelic piano, like you're being open to like the gates of, you know, whatever. But that is what it sounds like, and it's this high note, really beautiful production. And again, this is a song where I think it's worth just reading the lyrics out, because it really speaks for itself, and I'm going to go through the whole song because I think the lyrics themselves are really beautiful, then try and break it down a little bit. I've always felt a few steps outside of myself, a few seconds too late, knowing but unable to formulate, too vain, too lame, to aim, to chase, having but unable to have, collecting the sand, to try and restore the stone. The vision is clear, but I'm nowhere near, carrying something that's too heavy to bear, but wanting it near and holding it dear. Is it out of fear? So this is the best portrait of being close to what he wants, or an ideal image of himself where he's reached where he wants to be, where he's relieved of material. And then it goes on again, this cold kind of anti-summer album, even though it's been released in the summer, this cold gothic anti-summer. It plays into this with the next verse. Cold winter flowers under snow, is it still living? Yes, yes, all alone, so flowers living underneath this cold snow. Summer's indefinitely postponed. I'll hope, I'll hope. I hope I won't be buried under the snow, all this snow, so cold, nowhere to go, flowers lying down dormant for long, torment that has made them strong. Spring comes, they'll grow, they know, feather in the wind sinks like a stone. When the wind's finally gone, but the place is not the point, two sides of the same coin. I don't care, but I care. I'm challenged by nothing, I'm asking for suffering, I'm asking for it. I don't care, but I care. What is this sick justice? Our flesh turned to plastic, the rest is history. And it's like, again, this image of him as a flower underneath this cold, suffocating snow, and he's like, but I just gotta keep on waiting for summer. And it's like, even though he finds himself at a point where he's at a complete low, you know, he's just got to carry on, and there's just so much to unpack in this. And he says the place is not the point, like the location doesn't matter, or like the season doesn't matter. It's just about having hope, and the torment of the winter is what makes them strong, and being able to last. Then on the final kind of moment of the song, he has Echo 2K come in, which is very interesting because Echo 2K he made an album with in one of the more optimistic kind of moments in his discography, with Raise the Flag, and he's repeatedly interpolating stuff from his discography throughout here, so I wouldn't be surprised if him ending this with Echo 2K is more about this optimism and trying to get to that place. And yeah, that final verse of Echo 2K goes like, yellow leaves in a black puddle, smell of the winter soon coming, the threat of nothing, I'm scared of nothing, I want something, say something, just tell me something, anything. I know I said I'd do anything, and you never thought I would lie, neither did I. Let's wish for something. Let's skip assumptions, let's think, let's sing. Won't you let the love in? Let's wish for something, let's skip assumptions, let's think, let's sing. Won't you let the love in? God is love, is my love, cold. And I think that's incredible. Like, I think the idea of I'm scared of nothing, I want something, just say something, just tell me something. It contextualizes the whole very noisy production, where it's like it's almost filling this hole inside of him. This loud, bombastic production is filling something inside him. It's filling this hole and this emptiness, his need to want for something. And the final ending note after all of this, to have finally reached the conclusion of let's wish for something, let's skip assumptions, let's think, let's sing. Won't you let the love in? Let's wish for something. Let's skip assumptions. Let's think. Let's sing. Won't you let the love in? God is love. Is my love. It's about putting hope and faith in something beyond yourself. And even despite like how scared he is and how much he's been through and how hurt and damaged he is, he has to keep belief in something above himself. And having a belief in love, or having a belief in God, that everything is ultimately going to be okay and that it's all for kind of like a purpose. And I think to have reached that conclusion with the lows that we see on this album, that ultimately he has faith in God as his love and has faith in like love over anything else. Despite, you know, being a flower in the wind or a flower in the snow, the idea of like there's got to be something else coming in the broader scheme of things. There's got to be a summer that's coming, and I think that's a very beautiful way to end. But the final line is, God is love, is my love, and then cold. And he interpolates the line cold in the same way he has on the whole line, where it's kind of like he repeatedly has a voice effect with cold visions distorted over, and it just becomes like a symbol of the song. But here, instead of like it being like a closing note of this repeated trademark of, you know, cold visions in this voice coming on, it's just cold. So he said, God is love, is my love, cold. So not only is saying God is his love, he is also that line also becomes a question. God is love, is my love cold, is my love cold. So it still ends on a note of self-doubt, which is kind of sad, but it's a self-doubt that's under the framework of some hope. And I think what he is able to achieve with this is what all great artists are kind of able to, where you're waiting for it to end on an idea of good or bad, but it's something that's more complicated. It's something that's not as palpable as that, where he's got hope, but also he's questioning if his love is cold, if it's lost life, if he can break himself out of it. He's expressing the complex kind of day-to-day life and experiences that he's been through a built world that's embodied with philosophy, that's embodied with his own religious kind of views and interpretations, and how that shapes his life and how it gives him hope, but also makes him feel hopeless and distant from himself. His drug abuse, is my love cold? Like, has he gone cold? Even despite this frame of hope, he's still uncertain, and it ends on almost a sad note, but what feels like a truthful one, where he's still questioning himself, but there's still that hope there. And I think it's ultimately a song, again, about sort of an album, ultimately really about the journey of being able to find those moments of hope, being aware of these kind of lows. And again, even though this is an hour, it goes through so many human and wrestles with so many human sort of experiences and the lows, and how to keep yourself sustained through that. And I think for anyone who would be going through that kind of experience, it's something really probably valuable that you can, you know, through these reference points of philosophy, you can find hope or like life in a lot of this kind of art around you, like he does, and like draw meaning from it, no matter how lost you are. Even if it's not ultimately, even though it ultimately ends on "Is my love cold?" Which is a question of self-doubt. It's like, it's kind of, you know, it can be okay because there's always that framework of hope and love, and it's kind of conflicting, but so is this whole album. And yeah, I think it, in terms of like Blade's future, it makes me very interested to see, you know, how his next albums contribute to these ideas, the way he's wrestling with his own self and his own emotion, and his own feelings and his own struggles with abuse and his own struggles with getting lost and feeling out of step because of his own, yeah, sort of warped and distorted way of viewing the world and what it's kind of become. But But I do think that final song and the complexity that it shows, but also that pure hope that he has for his future and for the world, is like just such a beautiful note to end on. And I don't think there's many artists who can do that. Very, yeah, and it's kind of, yeah, it's very rambly, and it's kind of been, it's not a great sort of goal. I've been stopping in and out, but yeah, I sort of just wanted to do this for myself. Get all of these notes and all these thoughts, because obviously there's a lot out on this. Maybe there's something I'll continue, maybe not, because it is a lot, but yeah, I just kind of wanted to make that. Yeah, ultimately it's like, yeah, I'm really interested to see where his kind of art goes from here, and I'm so glad that for anyone who kind of would be experiencing that, he's able to find that kind of ending of framework of hopefulness, while still holding in place the suffering. And like you said, I don't think there's many artists that can do that. Yeah, I don't really know how to end this now, so I'm probably just going to end it. I don't imagine this is going to be something that's watched at all, as much as it is just a personal log, so I think that's okay.